Most men misunderstand what actually earns a woman's respect. They believe if they show love, affection, availability, she'll automatically appreciate it. But that belief, though noble in intent, often backfires. Because a woman doesn't respect a man for how much he gives her, she respects a man for how much control he has over himself. Emotional control is the true currency of masculine power. And in the context of attraction and long-term respect, it's not how much you feel, it's how well you manage what you feel. You see, love without boundaries becomes desperation, and desperation repels. When you're constantly reacting to her moods, checking your phone for her texts, wondering what she's thinking or feeling, you may believe you're being emotionally available, but to her, you're emotionally dependent. And that, psychologically speaking, is not attractive. Because when a man's internal state is dictated by external validation, especially her validation, he loses the very essence of masculine polarity. He becomes unstable in her eyes. Women are biologically and psychologically wired to test for strength, not always consciously, but instinctively. It's a form of emotional calibration. She wants to know, can this man hold himself when I pull away, when I withdraw, when I challenge him? And here's where most men fail. They start chasing, explaining, justifying, begging for connection. What they don't realize is, every time they do that, they're signaling, I don't trust myself. I need you to tell me I'm enough. But detachment, that's the quiet strength that commands respect. Not detachment in the sense of coldness or cruelty, but a deep, embodied non-attachment to outcome. A man who can feel desire, but not be enslaved by it. A man who can love, but not lose himself in the process. That's power. That's presence. That's the type of man who makes a woman stop and rethink everything. When you detach, you're not rejecting her. You're prioritizing yourself, your time, your energy, your emotional clarity. And that separation, it creates contrast. It gives her a mirror. Suddenly, she sees that you're not stuck in her orbit, that she doesn't own your attention. And in that moment, she realizes you have standards, you have depth. You're not just another man looking to be chosen. You're a man who chooses himself first. Philosophically, detachment aligns with the Stoic tradition, the idea that true power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering the self, in being able to hold your center, regardless of what chaos unfolds around you. This kind of internal integrity is rare, and women feel it. They might not always articulate it, but they sense it. And that sense becomes the foundation of lasting respect. Emotionally, detachment regulates attraction by creating psychological safety. Yes, safety. Because when a woman sees a man who is emotionally grounded, who doesn't lose himself in drama or need constant reassurance, she can finally relax into her feminine. She no longer has to play the role of emotional caretaker. Instead, she leans in, respects your emotional autonomy, and begins to trust your leadership. Most importantly, detachment doesn't mean disconnection. You can be emotionally intelligent and detached. You can love someone deeply and have boundaries. The difference is, you're not afraid to walk away from anything that costs you your peace, your purpose, or your self-respect. That silent readiness to let go if needed, that's what creates gravity. That's what changes how a woman looks at you. Because at the end of the day, respect isn't something you demand. It's something that emerges when a woman realizes you don't need her to feel whole. That your inner world is already complete, with or without her validation. And paradoxically, it's that very completeness that draws her in. So remember this. She doesn't start respecting you when you love her more. She starts respecting you when you love yourself enough to detach. What many men fail to grasp is that attraction doesn't thrive in constant availability. It lives in space, in unpredictability, in the unknown. And that's where mystery comes in. When you detach, when you step back, not out of manipulation but out of clarity and self-possession, you introduce an element most modern relationships are starving for: intrigue. See, in the early stages of connection, everything is unknown. There's discovery, there's curiosity, there's tension. But over time, most men, especially those driven by anxiety or insecurity, try to solve the woman. They text too much. They overexpress. They fill every silence with words, every distance with explanation. They try to close every gap because at some level they fear what that space might reveal. But that very act of over-communicating and over-connecting erodes the one thing women are deeply wired to crave: emotional suspense. Psychologically, mystery fuels desire, not because it's a game, but because it taps into the part of the feminine that longs to wonder, to imagine, to be pulled in rather than pushed upon. When everything is predictable, when you're always emotionally present without pause or pullback, you become familiar too quickly. And while familiarity is essential for stability, it's not what drives passion or respect. Mystery isn't about hiding who you are. It's about not overexposing yourself emotionally too soon. It's about holding something back, not out of fear, but out of strength. Detachment introduces that mystery, not by being cold or evasive, but by being complete within yourself. When you're not chasing, not constantly explaining where you stand or how you feel, she's left to feel you in your absence, and that's powerful. Because a woman doesn't just want to know your thoughts, she wants to experience your depth. But depth can't be forced. It has to be sensed. And she can only sense it when you create room for her to lean in. This is where philosophy meets intimacy. In existential terms, every person is fundamentally separate. Two souls with their own inner worlds. And in a relationship, the healthiest dynamic is not enmeshment, but the dance between closeness and distance, between knowing and not knowing. When you allow that rhythm to unfold, when you don't rush to resolve every moment of ambiguity, you build a kind of tension that's not anxious but magnetic. Most men interpret detachment as a lack of interest, but that's only true if the detachment is defensive, if it's rooted in fear or wounded pride. What I'm talking about is embodied detachment, a kind of grounded presence that doesn't need to perform. You're fully there when you're there, but you're also willing to step back and let her feel your value, not just hear about it. You give her the dignity of choosing you without begging to be chosen. And here's the paradox. When a woman doesn't know exactly where she stands with you, but senses your inner calm, she becomes more attentive. Not because she's insecure, but because you've disrupted the default dynamic. She's used to men who are emotionally overeager, who collapse at the first sign of distance. But when she meets a man who isn't afraid of space, who doesn't fill every moment with validation, she starts asking deeper questions, not just about you, but about herself. Why am I thinking about him? Why do I miss him? Why does his silence feel so loud? That's when you know you've entered her psyche. That's when respect begins to form, not through words, but through energetic contrast. And look, this isn't manipulation, it's alignment. It's about stepping into a masculine energy that doesn't chase, but draws, that doesn't demand, but invites. When you hold that frame, when you allow the mystery to breathe, You give the relationship the very oxygen it needs to ignite something real. So, if you truly want her respect, don't just show up constantly. Show her you're not afraid to disappear. Let the silence speak for you. Let the mystery do the talking. Because a man who can walk away without flinching is the man she'll never forget. He may not like that fact that many men struggle to accept, and it's this. People, including women, don't value what they have too easily. We may not like that fact, but psychologically, it's deeply human. What is given freely, constantly, and without boundaries tends to lose its perceived value over time. And the same dynamic plays out in romantic connection. If you're always available, always reaching, always eager to please, what you're communicating, often unintentionally, is that you're a man who needs to be chosen more than you're a man who chooses. Now, contrast that with a man who is willing to detach, a man who knows that his presence is not a guarantee, but a privilege. He doesn't offer his time just because someone wants it. He doesn't explain himself excessively. He's not afraid to walk away from anything that diminishes his integrity. And because of that, he becomes valuable. Not because he's playing games, but because his self-respect teaches others how to treat him. You see, a woman only begins to deeply respect you when she realizes she can actually lose you. Not because you've made threats, not because you're trying to manipulate her emotionally, but because your actions, your silence, your distance all convey something she didn't fully believe at first. You are complete without her. You don't need her for identity, for validation, for emotional survival. And that changes the entire power dynamic, because in that moment she begins to ask herself questions that make her feel the value of your absence. From a psychological standpoint, this is rooted in scarcity and loss aversion. The human brain responds more intensely to what it fears losing than to what it expects to gain. So when you're constantly showing up, regardless of how you're treated, you become expected, predictable, and in that comfort, respect quietly fades. But when you step back, when you remove your presence, your emotional energy, your validation, that absence isn't just empty space. It becomes a mirror that forces her to confront what she took for granted. This is where emotional discipline becomes essential. It's not enough to simply detach out of frustration. That's reactionary. The real shift happens when you detach from a place of inner stability, when you know that your worth isn't contingent on how she responds. And that's where she starts to feel the weight of losing you. Not because you're trying to punish her, but because you've stopped over-investing in someone who hasn't yet earned the position in your life. Philosophically, this ties into the idea of self-sovereignty, that a man must belong to himself before he belongs to anyone else. And when a woman senses that, when she sees that you're not afraid of solitude, that you don't collapse without her approval, something changes in her. Her sense of control dissolves. And with it, her subconscious power over the dynamic. You're no longer the one chasing her affection. She begins chasing your respect. It's important to understand women respect men who are willing to lose them, not out of apathy, but out of principle. A man who can walk away doesn't just have boundaries, he has backbone. And backbone is rare. It's what sets you apart from the crowd of emotionally dependent men who are terrified of making a woman uncomfortable. But what many men don't realize is that discomfort is often what awakens deeper attraction. When a woman can no longer predict you, when she can no longer pull your strings with silence or inconsistency, she's forced to recalibrate how she engages with you. And yes, this may trigger anxiety at first. You may feel like you're losing something. But in truth, what you're doing is filtering. You're giving her the opportunity to rise to your level or reveal that she never intended to meet you there in the first place. Either way, you win. Because you've refused to settle for a dynamic that costs you your self-worth. So let her feel the possibility of losing you, not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. Because only when your presence is no longer guaranteed does your value become undeniable. One of the most misunderstood qualities in modern relationships is what people call emotional availability. We often hear that women want a man who is open, vulnerable, communicative. And yes, that's partly true. But what's more true and far less talked about is this. What women deeply respect, often before love, before admiration, before intimacy, is a man who can hold his frame. A man who is emotionally grounded, not emotionally swayed. A man who is open, yes, but not porous. When you detach completely, something powerful happens. You establish the masculine frame she can trust. And trust is everything. Not trust in the sense of moral virtue or promises kept. Trust in the sense of, can I lean into this man and know he will not lose himself? Can I bring my full emotional storm and not watch him collapse under it? That is what the feminine longs for, even when she doesn't know how to ask for it. I say to you that asking for it, she's not testing your emotions just to be difficult. She's checking if you are anchored enough to hold both her fire and your own center. That's why detachment is not about distance. It's about definition. You know where you end and where she begins. You are not pulled into her emotional highs and lows because you've cultivated a stillness that exists regardless of what's happening around you. That's the masculine frame. It doesn't mean you're emotionally shut off, quite the opposite. It means you feel everything, but you're not ruled by any of it. Philosophically, we're talking about containment. The masculine is by nature the container for chaos, for emotion, for unpredictability. Not in a way that represses, but in a way that channels. Women want to feel, they want to emote, they want to process, and they often do that through movement, through expression, through relationship. But if you as a man become just another fluctuating part of that emotional wave, you can be the container. And if you can be the container, she can't fully trust you. And if she can trust you, she can respect you. And if she can respect you, she can stay attracted to you. So detachment becomes the soil where trust grows, not because you've abandoned her emotionally, but because you've refused to abandon yourself. You don't respond out of fear. You don't rush to fix her discomfort to make yourself feel secure. You don't explain every move you make or over-apologize for having needs. You lead calmly, quietly, consistently. And in that leadership, she finally feels safe enough to stop performing and start softening. Here's where it gets even more subtle. When you hold the frame, when you detach with presence rather than avoidance, you don't need to correct or control her behavior. Your energy does that for you. It communicates. I am not emotionally available for chaos. I am not seduced by games. I will meet you with depth, but I will not lower myself to anxiety. This is not about punishment. It's about preserving polarity, the very tension that keeps the relationship alive. This kind of detachment is rare. Most men either overexpress to win her approval or shut down completely to avoid confrontation. And even though the conflict is sometimes at the consummity, the vice punishes you and praises you to protect and protect, not preferring to compromise. This kind of tension is not a pit, but a process. Silence people watch. You make cops. But the man who can stay connected to himself in moments of disconnection with her, that man becomes unforgettable. He's not just a romantic interest. He's a psychological anchor. He's someone she feels compelled to grow beside because she can't sway him with emotional turbulence. And when a woman senses that she can't manipulate you, she finally relaxes. Not because she's lost control, but because she's found structure. And feminine energy needs structure in order to feel safe enough to open. That's why, in the end, detachment isn't just a relationship strategy. It's a form of emotional leadership. It's the invisible architecture that allows intimacy to unfold without codependency. And it's the very thing that transforms fleeting attraction into enduring respect. So don't detach to punish her. Detach to protect your presence. Because the moment she sees you refuse to abandon your center, she finally finds hers.